Everybody, and welcome back to the VMware 7.0 lab setup. Showed you some of the hardware I'm going to be using last episode or last video, whatever you call these. And today we're going to install VMware ESXi version 7 here in the lab. I'm doing this live, did a couple of test runs. It should be good, but you never know what's going to happen. So let's start out by where am I getting this stuff from? And I've got a couple options here. You can get a free VMware account just by signing up at vmware.com and get the ESXi demo right there. It's actually a full unlimited trial. It'll give you ESXi without any issues, but it does have limited features. You can't get vSphere, or you can get a vSphere trial, but it expires after so many days. Alternatively, and what I'm using today is VMUG Advantage. So for a couple $100 a year, or actually a little bit less than that, if you get a discount that's often available, you can get VMUG Advantage for 1 year, and it gives you a whole year worth of VMware software test drive. You can't use this in production, but you can use it in the home lab and get a lot of use out of it. So that's what I've been doing, and it works great. Then you don't have to be limited by features or be limited by refreshing your environment all the time when the demo runs out. So that's what I'm doing. And what I did today is downloaded that software and then opened up Rufus. I don't actually know how to say this. No, I don't want to look for updates. Okay, let's bring this into the screen. If you're not familiar with this, it's a fantastic USB bootable tool. So this will take any ISO image and it'll make it bootable to a USB, and that comes in handy all the time. So I would just grab the let's find out where I put this thing here, under my downloads on my desktop in my lab. So my file is called this VMware VMvisor version 7. Opened that, and for my purposes, I don't actually have a USB device in there, so it's not going to let me go any further than this. But I made sure I picked GPT because I want an EFI boot for this desktop that I'm using, and then I just wrote it to the disk. So that's how I got the bootable USB that I'm about to be using. So let's switch over to that now and take a look at that. That's actually a little bit farther ahead than we're supposed to be. Let's power this guy down, power it back up again, and we'll reinstall it to show you how it's done. So I believe I've got to do F9 on this one to boot. There we go. And I want to boot to my SanDisk Extreme here. Let's boot that up. And there it goes. So this is going to take a few minutes. And one thing I do want to note is when booting this up, VMware notified me that I did not have virtualization support turned on this hardware. So I had to go into the BIOS and turn on virtualization support. Typically, a home computer like what I'm using here would not have it on by default. And that's something you're definitely going to want to turn on before you actually go to use it. It's not going to let you do any virtualization with that turned off. Let's see where we're at. All right, it's making progress. There is no way to speed this ahead. This is a live video, so we're just going to have to deal with the fact that it's real time here. I am using a, if you didn't see the previous video, an HP 8300 Ultra Slim. So this thing is tiny. Currently, as you can see, it's only got about 8 gigs of RAM available to it and an i5. So it's not the most powerful thing, but just going through the install process alone is a great knowledge. So even if you don't end up deploying a lot of VMs to this thing, you're just going to get knowledge by simply going through the installation process, getting familiar with how to create bootable media, what is VMware and how do I install it, and a little bit of networking along with that too, because you'll see shortly this thing can be on DHCP or you can give it a static IP. We're going to have to browse to the web to configure it. So there's a lot going on here, and just going through this process, even if you don't utilize it a lot, is going to help quite a bit. So here's the the boot up menu that says welcome to VMware 7, and it's going to give you a little bit of a warning in a second here, but let's continue. And we have to hit F11 at this stage, and now it's scanning all of my devices. So right now I do not have the device that I want to install VMware installed, and what I want to do is install VMware here on a USB stick. So if you look here, this is just a standard USB stick. This is not even USB 3, although I do recommend it. This is just a USB 2. It's like a 4 gig. It's really old and small. I had it laying around. And I'm going to install this on this computer right now. And then I'm going to hit refresh. So we hit F5 to refresh. This is nice because if I am booting off USB, you can see the SanDisk there. If I had two of the same brand, about the same size, that I was booting, that I was going to use for this purpose, it would be hard to tell them apart. So one thing you can do is look at that VMHBA32 ID there after you put in the second one and hit refresh. And then you'll know which one was already there, which one I'm booting off of, and which one wasn't there already, which one I want to install on. I had that problem early on when I was doing several of these installs. So there's my new old one, the Lexar. Let's go ahead and continue with that. And it sees that I already have this installed in here because I did that in the trial run. So I'm just going to reinstall over the top of it. Normally you don't see that window. And it asks for the state and then the password. So for my labs, I don't get fancy. I just use the word password with a capital P, the number 1, and an exclamation point. Hopefully those match. All right. We're back in business. Okay, so this is the warnings I was talking about. It's basically just VMware saying we're not guaranteeing that your CPU is going to be supported in the future, and make sure that you have hardware virtualization turned on. So it's interesting. I have already turned it on this one, but it's saying that it's not a feature of the CPU, although I know that I can do hardware virtualization on this CPU. So let's continue and see what happens. It's not going to stop us from installing either way. There we go. So again, this is going to take quite a few minutes. There's no way to speed it up since we're doing this live. But let's take a look here at my current home lab. Perfect. No, let's go back to this one. Okay, so while that's installing, might as well show you around a little bit on my current. So this is another one, identical unit I have set up. Already have it configured, and we can log into this and just take a quick look around while we're waiting for them to finish up. So I'm not even sure what virtual machines I have on here. Let's take a look really quick. But this is what the user interface looks like, right? You're going to a web browser, you're going to the IP address, and the rest of this is filled in automatically, as you can see, the UI/pound/host. And then you get this kind of UI that allows you to see all sorts of things that are going on. It's pretty cool, right? How much CPU do I have and how much am I using? CPU is used the least. Unless you have a really CPU intense application, you're not going to really be limited by CPU. Memory is probably the thing that you're going to need the most of, especially if you do multiple VMs. That's what's going to be used up first. And then if you're running on an SSD like I am here, you're not going to have any storage performance issues, but you may have storage capacity issues as you spin up more VMs. So just try to keep them as small as possible. Let's check on our progress here. About 64, 65. Yeah, it's cruising right through. All right, let's keep looking. So as you can see, this one does have 16 gigs of RAM, a little bit less than that usable. And these CPUs are apparently 4-core, which is kind of cool. So, but yeah, this is pretty much what VMware ESXi looks like. So this is not vSphere. vSphere is a technology that is put on top of ESXi that takes several ESXi boxes and lets you manage them together. And that is very possible because then it lets you take like a VM. Let's say this is a domain controller 01 here for test. It would let me move this domain controller from one physical server to another while it's running. That's called vMotion. And that's a pretty basic operation in a production environment. So, well, it's nice to test here with just this one box. If you're going to want to go and build something in production, you're going to want multiple boxes, and you're going to want vSphere. It's really nice. All right, so before we get too much farther ahead, nope, we're still slowly moving at 70%. So all I've done here, when this is booted up, is I right-click and say Create VM. And then it's just this nice little wizard that brings you through. And then a nice thing about having a home lab is you don't have to worry about if you break it. And if you do break it, you don't have to worry because you just, spend the time, research, fix it, rebuild it, and move forward. So this really is a great place to learn. And we hit next on new virtual machine. Let's see, there's a couple options here. Let's just put in the word test 01 for this guy. And I like to leave a lot of this the same. We do have to pick our OS. Let's do Windows on this one. And then it gives you lots of choices. So Windows 10, 64-bit. I probably have an ISO for that laying around. Let's see. I don't want to turn on security for this. And we'll put it on data store 1. This is the local hard drive on this computer. And there's no reason not to leave that alone. Now we can pick since this is virtual, we can pick what resources we dedicate to this machine. How much memory I want to it. I'll give it 4 gigs. How much space? Typically in a lab environment, I'm actually going to pick thin provisioned, which means that it's only going to actually utilize the amount of disk it needs. Even though I can give this thing 100 gigabytes, it's not going to use 100 gigabytes. When I install Windows, it's just going to use whatever space Windows takes to install. And then it'll grow up to 100 gigabytes as it needs to. But the Windows OS that I install here will always see 100 gigabytes available. All right. And the other thing that I would probably do is change that network adapter. So by default, VMware is giving you a highly compatible E1000E network adapter. You want VMX Net 3, the best performing network adapter. Unless you're doing Linux, then you may want to do one of these older style because they are more compatible to give you Linux internet capabilities right away. But if possible, especially with Windows, I always do the VMX Net 3s. Okay, and everything else I'm just going to leave the same. And I think that's it. It's just going to confirm. So it's going to build that VM for me. Let's see where our install's at. Perfect. It's done. So remove installation media before rebooting and reboot. Okay, enter. Watch this guy boot up. And it does take quite a few minutes for VMware to boot cold. But we'll see the process here, right? Loading hypervisor, loading VMware ESXi. And then it starts booting. And this is the normal loading screen for VMware. This is what you would normally see. Not too exciting there. So let's give that a few minutes to boot up. Yeah, because we'll watch the next screen. It's going to go to a graphical interface in a second. And then from there, it's still going to take several more minutes. And if something was to go wrong, it would tell you at one of these menus here, it would tell you what the issue is. But already you can see that it's seen my 8 gigs of RAM, my CPU, the brand of the computer, right, the HP 8300. And it's actually moving pretty fast here. You're seeing the version, ESXi 7. And I have this plugged into my network already, my normal home network. Normally, as you saw with my lab here, this is my lab network, my 10.0.0.21. That is not my normal home network. I have it VLANed off. So This one right here for testing purposes is going to be on my home network. It's going to get a 192 address. And I'm not going to give it a static IP right now, but it will get a DHCP address automatically from my home router. And anybody who is looking for a nice home router solution, I highly recommend pfSense. We can take a quick look at that here. This is my pfSense dashboard. Of course, it's going to give me the SSL warning. And this is pretty fantastic. It's a home router that, well, it's an enterprise class piece of software. It runs on, I can't remember the version of Unix that it runs on. But it is awesome, and you can install it on any home computer. So I have a really old home computer that this is installed on right now. And as you can see, it's giving me graphical interfaces on all my LAN, my public, my lab. I've got a security network that I'm not really using right now. And you can VLAN off this thing. You can, if you install multiple NICs, you can hand those off to different networks. This is very powerful. So this is going to have the same kind of feature set that you'd get with any real, like, a professional Cisco unit. So I highly recommend it. And I've actually posted some previous videos about how to configure that as well. So now we've got this thing fully configured. As you can see here, my IP address is the 192.168.1.115. I'm going to browse to that in just a second. But if we wanted to change this IP, what we would do is hit F2. Down in the lower left, you see F2 to customize. We'd have to put in our password that we entered. And then it brings you to the customization menu, and you can change a lot of stuff here. What we would be doing is configuring the management network, and then we'd be configuring IPv4 for this purpose. And we would say static, and then we would go in and fill in those IP values for whatever we want. But we're not going to do that today. All right. So exit brings us back to this main menu. And this is how it sits. So after you install VMware, it just sits here looking like this all the time. So VMware operates headless. It's kind of like, it's not like Hyper-V installed or VMware Workstation, where you actually have an OS that you can use, and then you also have access to VMs. This is a complete hypervisor. All it does is host VMs, and you can't even manage it through this console. You have to manage it remotely through the web. So let's go there now. So that's 115, it looks like. Fine. All right. Again, there it goes. It gives us a warning about the SSL certificate because it's locally signed. So we don't care about that. We know what we're doing. And then it's going to ask us to log in. So the password, the username is always root, and then the password is whatever you set it to be. I use that password #1 exclamation point with a capital P. That meets all the credential requirements. I don't want LastPass to remember that right now because I'm going to change it. But yeah, you can choose whether or not you want to send your logs to VMware. And then right now, you see right out the gate, this license will expire in 60 days because I'm in evaluation mode. So back on VMware's website, I don't want to scroll up, but I do have a key that's available to me there that would give me, again, unlimited use to this VM. On vMug, which is the key I'll end up using, I have a key that'll give me 365-day trial to it. But then also I have keys for vCenter, which gives me more abilities. So right now we're logged in to the unit directly. It's got an IP. Again, we can see how much RAM and CPU it has. And you can see with only 8 gigs, I'm already, with only VMware installed, it's already using 1.25 gigs. So it's using quite a bit of memory just to run itself. And I've only got, just over 6 gigs free to run a VM. That's not a lot of space. I mean, you could definitely run 4 or 5 VMs, especially smaller ones. You can run them with pretty low RAM and cram them in there, but the performance is going to suck, and you're just not going to have a good experience. So the most RAM that you can get and the most RAM that you can afford is the way that you want to go. And that's why I upgraded these to 16. And the 16 is the maximum that this hardware format can do, which is kind of a limitation. So think about that when you're planning what hardware you want to use for your lab. And we already kind of went through everything else here. I'm not going to go into anything more in this one. So in a future video, I'll try to cover things like how to actually get media onto ESXi, and then how to build out a VM, and maybe some more networking stuff on top of that. So any questions, post them in the comments, and I hope this was helpful. Thanks.